My name is Pavel Luksha. I will be one of co-hosts today together with my colleague Morgan. And our first speaker in the series is James Ehrlich, who we will introduce in a moment. But let me first tell you about this space and this talk series. So U4P means University for the Planet. And this university does not exist yet. It's a project in making. And we see this university as a learning ecosystem for societal transformation that can help all of us become members of the planetary species, members of the planetary family, and to learn how to align our life and our economies, our governance systems, our culture with the planet itself, because planet has been here much longer than us human beings. And Marilyn Hamilton, who is here today with us, has been always inspired by the work of James Lovelock, as probably many people here. And Lovelock was talking about Gaia, the holistic organism of the planet. More recently, this idea was evolved by Adam Frank, a cosmologist who talks about planet as a super intelligent being. So being part of this super organism and super intelligent being, how well are we supporting it? How well we are aligning with it? Or what we know about the crisis we're facing as a species, the trespassing of planetary boundaries that has been recognized in the past decade. It means that we might go extinct in a relatively short time span. Geologically, it's just a flick of a moment. But we're talking maybe about decades or hundreds of years that we are risking facing the extinction as species, probably with a significant part of the biosphere. So how can we learn to be to reverse this process, to listen to Gaia, to the planet, and be aligned with it? Big part of the answer of to that question is how do we practically implement it in our lives? How do we align our economies, our daily lives with this task? Which means that we need to start rebuilding our society and create new ways of living, new ways of consuming, new ways of producing our food, creating our houses, habitats, cities, our transportation systems, our energy production systems, our learning systems, and many, many more aspects of what makes us human beings. So the idea of talks that we conceived in our group was, what if we start bringing people that are actually working on this task and are already creating some viable prototypes, making that, let's say, making that bridge between what we need as a species and what is there now, because we know that the current systems probably are not fully supporting this transition, but some people are discovering these pathways into the future through their work as entrepreneurs, as change makers, as different, I would say, different types of entrepreneurs: technological entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, institutional entrepreneurs. So we want to bring these, let's say, heroes of transition into the spotlight and start discussing what are the viable models, what are the possibilities, what is the way of thinking we need to adopt, what is the new types of business models that we can collectively discover and implement, and what is the type of leadership that we need to exercise to make it real. And that's the purpose of the series. And today we will have our first hero in the spotlight, James. But before turning to James, I would like to ask Morgan to also talk a little bit about how we see the series. Morgan.
Thanks, Pavel. Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief. This is our first talk as part of this umbrella of U4P. So when we first, there's one way that we write U4P, which is the letter U, the number 4, and the letter P. And so we talk about these things that are in the intersection of people, planet, prosperity, and progress. And what we're looking to do is highlight these sort of tools and methodologies that promote what we call the thrivability of the planet and all the people on it. And when we say prosperity, that's when we get into these sort of economic models of how do we start to build, where is the limit of our knowledge in terms of human and planetary thrivability. And then the last P, the fourth P, progress, meaning we have these aspirations. Pavel was talking about the soul of the planet and Gaia and the sort of wisdom. And I feel like for us to achieve that, we have to sort of start someplace, and to be okay with that sort of compromise. So one of the ways that we envision these talks is the practitioners who are building at this intersection, for them to talk about what they've learned, what those models are, what some of the shareable practices are. And I just encourage, I mean, I'm so overwhelmed with the international and intellectual presence of all the participants here. So, it's kind of an awkward thing with the Zoom. We're all on it with all these people. How do we make it more interactive, et cetera? In the idea of progress, I'll just share like a few practices. If you can, when you like something, if you can just react with the thumbs up, and if we can keep the chat really active, oftentimes the chat record serves as one of the best resources. And so we'll be publishing that at the end as well. So with that, I'd like to pass it over to James Ehrlich, who is really a great example of someone working at the intersection of all four of these things. Planetary thrivability, human thrivability, and based in Silicon Valley, sort of working with all of these economic models to really develop something and put it into action. So with that, I'll allow James to take it away.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here, and I know we had a couple of false starts in my talk over the last few months, and I'm really grateful that we've had a chance to plan it and be here with so many lovely people from literally all around the world. This is incredible, right? I am based at Stanford University. I've been here since 2012, but I've spent about 15, 16 years doing case study research of organic, biodynamic, small plot family farms and eco-villages, intentional communities, et cetera, around the world. I am a professed foodie. I love food. I love to eat. I love to cook. I love everything that has to do with this idea of access and agency, right? With where our food comes from, the bioavailability of nutrition, the idea of recipes and stories that you don't need language to express between people. And so interestingly enough, my case study research about these places around the world turned into a popular television cooking series that I produced and directed for a number of years called Organic Living. We had a sister TV show that was a little more edgy called Hippie Gourmet. It was a wonderful journey into this idea of how and where we live that relates to human and planetary health. So fast forward, I came to Stanford armed with this sort of master's thesis. Shout out to Professor Larry Leifer from the Center for Design Research, now retired. If it wasn't for Professor Leifer, this whole concept probably wouldn't have taken wings. And Dr. Chris Ford, who is a wonderful architect and professor focused on resiliency in the built environment at Stanford, we really started to understand the mechanical engineering aspects, if you will, about regen villages. But the talk is going to take a progression. So the progression really is going to be through this idea of what's called creative destruction, right? And we'll come through creative destruction to the phoenix of rebirth, if you will. What is an eco-village? And it's this whole concept really of this human-centric, full-featured community that, and I love this idea from Diane and Robert Gilman back in 1991, harmlessly integrated into the natural world, right? not only supportive of human healthy development, but that they can continue indefinitely into the future. That's the idea behind regeneration, okay? Is that things can just keep going forward and actually improve and get better with time. Most subdivisions around the world, as you know, do not do that. Most apartment buildings around the world do not do that. And so we really love this whole concept of the eco-village movement, and this is my inspiration to bring Regen Villages forward. I love this idea of, and I say it often, that if you take a half a step towards Mother Earth, she'll literally throw her arms around you. And what does that mean? It means if you look at a place like Oroville, which is an eco-village about 100 kilometers south of Chennai in India, when the founders, which was a small group of people, came to this eco-village, it was really an arid desert landscape. And with methodical permaculture, and we'll talk more about that, berms, the gills, the swales, the planning of water capture and water flow, and the right kind of planting of indigenous flora, fauna, things like this, and the right kind of animal husbandry, that they were actually able to rejuvenate the soil. We'll start with that and move upwards towards flourishing. And now they have about 3,000 full-time residents. Pre-COVID, they had something like 500,000 visitors a year. And these communities, and this community in particular, is capable of really being islanded and resilient in many ways. This is another amazing example in Jordan. Jeff Lawton, brought this permaculture concept to Wadi Rum. Just taking 5 hectares of land, he was able to the planting and the soil regeneration in such a way that then he was able to bring the small animal husbandry and things like this. Again, all about creating the circumstances for rejuvenating soil and the flora and the fauna. And what was remarkable is the same thing with what happened in Oroville, was that it reawakened the microclimate around the entire area. As you can see, the microclimate goes well beyond the 5-hectare parcel that they started with. There's lots of opportunities for us to reclaim areas that are previously considered to be lifeless, right? One of the things that sort of, I guess, scared me into action was a Rockefeller Foundation report, which basically said that up until 1950, 75% of all humanity lived in small, self-sustaining communities. And their projection of 2050 would be exactly opposite, that nearly 10 billion people, 75% of which would be living in coastal megacities. And this is really kind of a terrifying concept that we are further and further disassociated from our natural resource flows, right? So some examples historically from way back in Mesopotamia, the ability for people to have closer access to their natural resource flows was there, and gave them the ability to start to create these more, let's say, urban-like communities and areas. Of course, now we look at megacities and these metropolis developments, which are reliant on systems and services at much greater distances. One of the things that I came across recently, this community that existed 6,000 years ago, so even before Mesopotamia, in the area around Ukraine and Moldova, where the whole purpose of this community was really about soil. What could they do to use animal husbandry to continuously fertilize the soil? And so the nitrogen complex that they uncovered, that the animal husbandry there wasn't for meat protein necessarily. That was maybe for a festival once or twice a year, but primarily it was for soil rejuvenation. And they were massive. We're talking about, at the time, you can imagine communities of 15,000 plus people. So where have we gone wrong? There's a long list, right? And this whole idea of conveying all of these different, you can call them really calories, even including megawatts and megahertz and and gallons of water and kcals of food, right? That they're all having to be transited at great distances to come to these urban areas. And then, of course, the waste has to be exported in the form of tons. And these lifeline systems are now further and further spread out and more brittle, and each one of them represents potential catastrophes, as we can see and are seeing more and more of, right, around the world. By way of example, I'm at Stanford University. I'm in Palo Alto, California. Our water, travels quite a distance to get here from the Hetch Hetchy Reserve. Along that system, there are places where some kind of issue could be introduced, and then all of a sudden, an urban location like San Francisco and the entire Bay Area can be without water. And so, again, any one of these things or a combination of these things can contribute to civilization collapse. So, looking at natural disasters, right? So there's a brief history of natural disasters from the San Francisco Bay Area. And each one of these natural disasters was either a culmination of a natural disaster, but also that then caused an infrastructure failure, right? So you had the earthquake that happened in Prieta in 1989. And then what happened was you had this infrastructure failures with water systems, with gas systems, et cetera. Conversely, you have infrastructure failures that can cause additional infrastructure failures. And then you can have infrastructure failures that then cause natural hazards, like, for instance, the massive forest fires that we've had across Northern California, where a downed power line caused the fires to spread unchecked. So I'm an optimist. I just want to really lead also with that. I believe in our ability for human resiliency. I really feel that we have this innate ability to come forward with solutions, and that's going to be our torch going through these very dark times ahead, right? That we have solutions, and we have to bring those solutions to the fore, but we do have them. So what can we do to collapse those distances, right? This is the exciting part of the talk. What can we do in action to collapse those vast distances between where our things are produced to where they are consumed, right? And so when I came to Stanford, the story really was that I got immediately involved in something called the Solar Decathlon. This was initially a U.S. Department of Energy competition of who could build the most energy positive home, passive home, let's say. It's a flat pack house design that's intended to be shipped to a designated location around the world, and then built, and only have 2 weeks to build it. So they have 18 months to design, but only 2 weeks on site to build this house. And what I love about the competition is that it has to be a fully functional, hookup ready design, because at the end of the exhibit, the house has to be deconstructed, flat packed, shipped back to the campus that it came from, rebuilt, and someone has to live in it, right? So there's no waste involved, and it actually is a livable home. About 5 minutes into the cohort, into the research team, I went to the professors at the time, Professor Larry Leifer again, and I said, from my experience traveling around the world looking at eco-villages, a smart house inside of a dumb neighborhood doesn't make much sense. And I was really blown away by his response, which was, this is a really big idea, what you're talking about. And he paused and he said, let's do it. And it still brings tears to my eyes, right? Because that design empathy that he showed me is where this whole idea really came to fruition. I then started digging into this concept of this idea of the Solar Decathlon from a neighborhood scale perspective. What's interesting about the Solar Decathlon is that not only are these individual homes coming from diverse campuses from around the world, right? But there's a substrate, microgrid, usually sponsored by a big company. In this case, it was Schneider Electric. Now, this microgrid was understanding, even way back in 2013 and 14, what each home was producing in power, what it was consuming in power, what it was contributing to the overall battery storage and grid, and then what Schneider was able to then disperse back to the grid in terms of share. Now, this whole concept of a microgrid was quite new to me and really fascinating, and I thought to myself, wouldn't it be amazing if we could increase the definition of a microgrid to include high-yield organic food production, clean water, right, harvesting, conservation, circularity, and waste-to-resource management in connectivity with the energy and passive homes. All of a sudden, we have the modern interpretation, if you will, of an eco-village. If you forgive the term, an industrialized approach to unfolding these kinds of communities around the world. To get back to literally the roots of things, I was inspired deeply by the work of Dr. Suzanne Simard from the University of British Columbia, who discovered this amazing fibrous network under the forest floor called the mycelial mycorrhizal bundles. These are gigantic organisms that are probably can be 30, 40 plus kilometers radial diameter. They don't have a central brain, but they're sentient at the point of sensing. But moreover, they're a conveyor belt of carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, sugars, water, and they're signaled electrochemically. It's a have-need network. I call it Mother Earth's original crypto network, right? Because she's basically, through the mycelial network, not only creating this place where the cultivars are communicating with each other, which is proven now, but they're conveying goodwill to each other across vast distances. And also, the network itself is self-healing. And I thought, well, that is a wonderful model for how can we bring technology and machine learning into the mix. How can we use machine learning and artificial intelligence to help our planet and to help our species and other species thrive and flourish? And by addressing critical housing shortages around the world, right? So how can we design neighborhoods around these key components where the output of one system can be the input of another and essentially create a digital mycelial network? And to, moreover, to start to understand, to expose and explore the relationships between these different previously siloed components, right? The energy system doesn't talk to the water system, except for, obviously pull something from it, but it doesn't know why. We want to explore the why and have it learn about the why. So then all of a sudden, it can make some interesting decisions about its relationship to each other in this broader system, and very much akin to how the forest floor is navigated through by the mycelial networks. So we've been architecting and developing this elegant, abstract data model called the VillageOS, the Village Operating System. And it's really a combination of, on one side, kind of a SimCity generative design tool for simplicity to get these communities planned faster. And the other side is an operational tool once the communities are actually built. On the design side, you can imagine and understand that there's, and I'm just going to go through this stuff real quick, is that there's these layers of information, available data to us now, right? Satellite data, geospatial data, government data, landowner data, et cetera, which relates not only to parcels and zoning, but also beneath it, right? The geology, the hydrology, the topography, the soil. And all of that creates an information model based on indigenous wisdom. What does the land really want in order to then place new build housing on that community, in that place? Moreover, how can we use the software to create a mechanism to reduce rhetoric? One of the biggest issues we see in planning these communities has to do with people's discomfort, the neighbors' discomfort, the government's discomfort, a lot of bristling that happens. But if you have a game-like interface that's really inexpensive for the average aging farmer, let's say, to use, we start to get into this exciting new era of dialogue and transparent visualization to communicate where words fail us. right? And I think that's a really exciting way forward. And the same way that that positive feedback loop then also reflects on the AI for the operational mode for the community. Always looking for ways to improve or mitigate against risk or model new systems from a digital twin perspective. By a visual example, imagine here's a 25-hectare, 60-acre fallow piece of farmland that's handcuffed under agricultural zoning only. That means that the aging farmer and whose kids don't want to farm anymore, and these very anxious real estate developers and other people are just, they want to do something to create another yet crappy, if you will, subdivision on this land. Imagine instead that we can use the VillageOS software to envision 400 or 500 home community on that 25-hectare, 60 acres, where the majority of the housing density is pushed to less than 1/3 of the location road facing, but where more than 2/3 of the land is reimagined, organic, biodynamic, non-till soil farming, controlled environment farming, water capture, energy generation storage. The goal being that these neighborhoods can be breakaway, can be safe in case of fill in the blank district failure, right? And those utility failures are going to be happening more and more and more as we go forward, whether it's drought, whether it's floods, whether it's fires, and also being able to rapidly address the needs for climate migration and for refugees, which we can talk about at length in the chat. Also, not to forget the urban folks, I grew up in New York City, that what can we do in an urban setting to imagine how many days or weeks or even longer a community can be without a district tie and not fall into collapse. And so this is one of the things that we think that the software can do very well going forward. But also in looking at applying farming to a quilt, a patchwork of circularity, okay, where these systems are in communication with each other, and that biodiversity and access of a full menu at the neighborhood scale is life affirming and health improving, right? But also that we can look at controlled environment farming through the similar lens, that we can use aquaponic, aeroponic, so year-round supplementation of nutrition that is, again, bioavailable, and it's diverse. It's not monoculture. It's not single crop, leafy greens and microgreens. It's as much as we can possibly imagine in the high protein kinds of cultivars. And I've seen around the world aquaponic and aeroponic systems even do stunted papaya, quinoa, amaranth, all kinds of interesting grains and things like this. So it's not just limited to leafy greens. Another really important part, of course, is digesting waste, right? Turning food and animal waste into these really important food inputs for the chickens and the fish and the other small animal proteins. That essentially the black soldier fly larvae and the aquatic worms, they eat their own weight every day in food and animal waste. And that anaerobic digestion also then has a byproduct of beautiful, fertile topsoil. In other words, we're going back to that model of the ancient 6,000-year-old communities. Let me just switch gears for a second and talk about the built environment and the idea right now of what we're moving into in terms of prefab, precision, robotic construction using earthen building materials. We have seen now a revolution in fast-tracked construction where 1/3 less construction waste is happening. That's 1/3 of every new house is going into a dumpster. Imagine. We can shave that waste down to almost nothing. That's pretty incredible, right? And then 1/5 less time on site in construction. Imagine these even residential towers made all of mass timber or cross-laminated timber, hempcrete, other kinds of building materials going up within a matter of a few weeks once the site has been permaculture planned, right? And what are we building? And who are we building for? For the rest of us. It's resiliency for the rest of us. It's not the bunkers for the wealthy. It's this idea that we can actually be and live in these communities with diversity, with socioeconomic access for social, affordable, middle-class budgets, living together in communities where there's light commercial spaces, clinical health, dental, curriculum, shared work environments, piazza kitchens. I go back to my culinary inspiration and roots, this whole concept that food is a disarming factor in bridging beautiful gaps between people and being able to get people to smile with each other and laugh and tell stories, even if they don't speak the same language. It's about building communities that are within nature, not separate from it, right? It's about this idea of access and agency and engaging. My current affiliation at Stanford University, and now I'm in the School of Medicine at the Center for Compassion, Altruism, Research and Education as Director of Compassionate Sustainability, because what we're doing is we're looking at this idea that how we live and where we live reduces amygdala response, which then reduces cortisol release. This is all a key metric for happy longevity, for aging with dignity, right? Where we're living in communities where the amenity is our natural resource flows, right? That's where we know we need to be. Also, where we're raising our children, not disassociated from our elders, multi-generational communities where there's a story arc of life. I love this story I share about being in Nico Village, where I went to the community center, because typically they have these lovely little community centers, and I saw the message board. There were birth announcements, birthday celebrations, life graduations, certifications. There were, employment opportunities. Then there were people retiring. There was hospice care, and there were death announcements, all in the same community. This is something we've lost in our lives. We relegate and push off the best and the brightest of our communities to these senior assisted living communities, and it just is not. It's anathema to It Takes a Village. Where I am in Silicon Valley, we've got a host of interesting new technologies coming, which I think within the next 10 years, or maybe even a bit sooner, this idea of cars and driveways and garages is going to go away. We will have ubiquitous, self-driving, autonomous mobility. We'll also have this amazing opportunity to reimagine supply chains, right? Not from these globalized, very brittle, distant access points, but local, regional supply, supported by these drone deliveries, drone taxis, and other kinds of autonomous things. I'm really saying that every village that we can imagine building as quickly as possible can be a supplier to these local, regional supply chains, because they end up in aggregate overproducing public goodwill. So I want to thank everybody for taking the time to visit with me today. I want to say, first and foremost, that we are at a critical juncture in human history where we have all of the tools. They work. It's no matter longer about this idea of ideation or Star Trek, right? Holodeck. We're talking about very real situations that we can build right now. And I'm looking for people who are interested in supporting what we're doing all around the world. And so I welcome the conversation that will come subsequent. And again, I'm grateful so much, Pavel and Morgan, for having me. And I will stop sharing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bravo. And I'm sure there is a ton of questions. So we'll just warm up. I'm sure there'll be many questions coming from the audience, but I will take the privilege of being the host, and I will ask the first one, and then let Morgan, and then we'll invite the rest of the audience to also join us. My question, James, is as you were mentioning, we have all the tools. You have this inspiring approach, this method that is not just theoretical. You have been proving it with decades of work. Why we think this is not yet, let's say, a new boom in terms of the same way as the, for example, digital wave is being supported, like AI. Why are we not seeing this revolution of regenerative economics yet?
Well, let me just say, I really feel from an optimistic and positive perspective to start with, that we have inspired a generation of people and a new generation coming, right? That especially in residential real estate development, we're seeing more and more of these things called agrihoods popping up. These are communities that are being built either next to an organic farm or connected to an organic farm or some kind of garden farm plots. So I celebrate that. That's amazing. Also seeing, the movement towards passive home design and development, of using earth and building materials, of 3D extrusion in this way. So I'm seeing that there are the building blocks moving more and more towards this. There is a darker side of a group of folks out there who don't want humanity to be independent from fill in the blank, okay? Whether it's transit, whether it's utilities, whether it's big ag, is there quarterly revenues, right? Which by its nature is extractive. We've raised a couple of million euros since 2016, mostly from some family offices and some strategic partners, and I've been building our VillageOS software since then. We've been engaging with landowners from all around the world. We've got a few really interesting, exciting projects that we're engaged in right now, but it is a matter of capitalization. Unfortunately, it's not just about vision. It's really about capital, and that momentum can really carry that forward. There's optimism and there's hurdles that we need to overcome.
I was wondering in terms of raising that capital, or interacting with the sort of the capitalism, the global capital market that we have to interact with. What do you think are the most important lessons that you've learned, and what are the sort of most important things that you can say? Because I'm sure a lot of people in this talk are dealing with this similar problem or similar issue.
And it's a great question, and so we've come to basically is a bit of an epiphany, because back in 2016 when we started the company, we always wanted to be essentially a software and provide a software service in terms of machine learning to design and operate communities, right? But the technology was nascent. It didn't really exist so much. And we learned straight away the extractive nature of the local governments, of the consultants required, architects, engineers, planners, urban planners, environmental assessments, all these different kinds of things, have a lot of risk capital and end up delaying projects for years. And you either have to be a king, a sport of kings, and have the capital to withstand that, or you have to have a bit of a crocodile skin like I do, and say, okay, that's not going the way I thought it was going to go. But what we did was we learned from that whole process, and we incorporated that into the design thinking of our software, right? That we could imagine that an aging farmer or landowner who's asset rich but cash poor, who would like to see what they could build on their land without losing the legacy of their organic farm or the farmland, but whose children don't want to farm anymore. So there's this balance, right? And to give them a kind of a SimCity-like tool that actually can get them into preliminary planning and approvals. And if you can imagine that synapse of a landowner with no skills being able to tell a story about their land, engage with the local government, engage with the local neighbors and community, get a project into preliminary approvals, all of a sudden, the value of their property and of their project can be better expressed. And not only that, it can attract at that point private equity and patient mezzanine finance who are looking for kind of de-risked asset-backed development projects, right? That's really what we're talking about. So really the software is this goal is to make it easy, fun, simple to bring a project to fruition. We want to see as many of these lily pads of communities around the world get built as quickly as possible.
A bunch of raised hands now. So I think Bruce, you came up first. So
Yeah, so lovely, exciting presentation with the incredible richness and all about learning and all about creating this opportunity to experiment and prototype and learn. So I'm wondering, James, how, and you note that it's the Tesla of eco-villages. So I'm wondering if you could provide me a little bit of background on how you've connected with or engaged with or not engaged with the Global Eco-Village Network. Because as I understand it, and I can see you nodding, so clearly there's the story here. That's an incredible global learning community divided up into regions and 10,000 different communities, and it seems to be a hotbed of experimentation who would be very interested in your more sort of high-tech software-oriented solutions and how that could correspond with the many experiments they have underway. I wonder how does that resonate with you?
It resonates a great deal, and thanks for bringing it up. Back in 2014, I went to Denmark, and I met with Ross Jackson, the grandfather, if you will, of the modern, let's say, Global Eco Village Network, GEN. We sat down, I showed him, our nascent, kind of plan, proposal. And Ross Jackson said to me, I've been waiting for someone like you to ring my doorbell for a really long time, because it takes between 8 to 30 years to build 100 homes, typical eco-village. And we just don't have the time left anymore on the planet. We need to be rapidly unfolding these communities as quickly as we possibly can, and finding the right economic method so that it's inclusive, first and foremost, but also that it really does resonate with the larger investment folks in the world, so that it meets and exceeds actually their ESG, environmental social governance, SDG, right, sustainable development goal, and climate metrics. And that's why we want to see how we can make these communities happen faster. But thanks for the question and for the memory of being close to Ross Jackson.
Maximo, I think you're next.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, James, thank you so much for the presentation. I think many of us here are probably can't wait to live in one of those beautiful renders that you showed us. At least I want to live in one of those. And I think related to that is a little bit my question, which is, a little bit coming back to the practicalities, right? So who do you envision as a user, right? Because I know you showed a slide in which there was a plot of land and you said, okay, if we had different zoning, so into my mind, I understood that maybe this could be a tool for city planners or for policymakers that could try to understand different ways. Like, for example, I come from Galicia, it's a pretty rural part of Spain. But then many people want to build a house or a small house in the countryside, but they can't because there's all these restrictions. So I guess that would be a very good use, right? Like, let's rethink how we plan our rural side. But from a user or a person point of view, is there also a use for that? Like, for example, me, if I want to build tomorrow co-living, co-housing, eco-village, whatever you want to call it, with some friends in the countryside, can I use your tool? And then what sort of data, like, do I need the data of these layers? Like, how does it actually work? So if you can. Yeah.
And we're developing this data model and expanding on the data model to really focus on indigenous wisdom of what the land really wants. And so we think it's an exciting opportunity to take a Bucky Fuller approach, our Buckminster Fuller approach to resource-driven planning, and having a simple tool when it comes to the individual landowner or community that wants to come together. We want to empower you. We want to give you this ability to have fun, to simply understand what's possible even on a piece of land. Like Bucky Fuller would say, how do we establish a new model that makes the old model obsolete, right? So what can we do? So that's really the vision of the VillageOS software. The one thing we've been really blessed with is global press coverage. We've been in New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Reuters, BBC, Guardian, South China Morning Post. I mean, features about us. And that's attracted landowners from around the world. So we have several projects that we've been working on, kind of a traditional planning right now, but we're using that planning data to inform and teach the VillageOS. But what you see what we're getting at here is diverse climate zone interest and development, from the Nordics way north to the tropics to MENA to sub-Saharan Africa, that we build this repository of data that can really get these communities designed faster.
We have Alexander, and then Neil, and then Nick, and then Adil, and then Jazz.
Great, thanks so much. So I have this big question about how this transition can actually happen. And let me preface this, James, just by saying that I hate it when people ask me, so can you respond to how your parents dealt with this and what their views were and so on? But look, both Paul and Anne, your parents, were involved in this huge debate, particularly your father.
Let me just clarify. Sorry, one second, Alexander. Paul Ehrlich is a second cousin.
Okay.
My dad was Mel Ehrlich, Dr. Mel Ehrlich, who was a physicist and an amazing inventor. But
right.
And Paul and I are very divergent mindsets.
Exactly.
Put it that
exactly.
way.
So this is what I want to just bring in. But you're right. So family relation, right? I didn't mean to. So in any case, it's not genetic at all. But the question is being involved in that, where you stand on this. I don't want to get into the whole neo-Malthusian 1980s debate, right? The neo-Malthusian cornucopian frame. But this idea of the rational optimist and this idea of how Amory Lovins, and you have Jared Diamond, who's been involved in this with his works on collapse and others. So all of this stemming from Rachel Carson and the Club of Rome's, limits to growth kind of framing. What is the framing in terms of your hopes for this? And I don't mean this because of course we all have hopes that this is how the world is going to, we can do this, but how do we bring this into the discourse in such a way that it doesn't get dismissed? And what are the mounting, do you see any mounting tensions for those who will say, no, this is just, we're going to have a blind eye and a deaf ear, even though you have the technological capacities, you've shown all of this. I'm looking for realpolitik in a certain way. What do you think it's going to take to actually bring this into play?
I mean, Paul Ehrlich obviously is a retired professor at Stanford, and for better or for worse, his population explosion book, from the 70s, spurred some wonderful disaster movies like Soylent Green, for instance, with Charlton Heston, which scared the living crap out of me as a kid. My parents used to take me to all these sort of existential threat films, and I think it impacted me, it imprinted on me, right? So understanding, my second cousin and his mindset, but I think him and Anne are well-meaning. At the same time, it's dystopic. Their thought process is about how to limit population growth, as opposed to Bucky Fuller's perspective, which is how can we feed, house, hydrate, empower, clothe, really bring people forward, 10 billion or more on spaceship Earth. We really are at this point, again, in our evolution as a species, where we have an opportunity to create these new models that gets everybody interested and excited and capable. We have these very real situations happening right now around the world. Climate migration, refugees, okay? We have wars driven by resource scarcity, when the truth is there is no scarcity, there is opportunity, if we consider, again, rejuvenation.
Hi, everyone. Hi, James. Thank you so much. That was really interesting, exciting to hear about. My training was in engineering, and I am at that same point of trying to work out how do we use what we can to create conditions for more life. Really interested in that intersection of the two. Also, the game interface, I had a question around when you say you've been talking to landowners, and in particular people in the global south, I'm wondering what wisdom and insight you have from interacting with them about how it is for them learning to interface with it. My perception of landowners who at the point of not, they're usually elderly generation who have siblings, who have children who don't want the land, typically not so technology literate. So I'm wondering what insights you have into introducing them to this way of interacting with data.
Thank you so much, and happy to also learn more about your engineering background. It's always great to talk to people with sort of tool belt experience. Yeah, I mean, really what it comes down to is this idea that we've seen this now explosion of generative design and AI. Okay, what can we do to inform compassionate data models that relate specifically to this kind of land-based indigenous wisdom, so that, for instance, an aging farmer and their relatives, their kids, whatever, can bring up the software. It can look at their land. It can do an analysis of the land. It can bring forward a series of kind of toggles and choices for what they could do with the land if they just want to continue farming it and making it more permaculture, organic, biodynamic productivity, or to be able to marry that productivity with some new build housing. And on the new build housing side is to look at what are the passive home designs, generic values for that climate zone. And again, the software starts to suggest ideas for the kind of nice little village that a community could imagine being built on that land. Because there's satellite data, there's geospatial data, there's inference data from other projects that have happened around the area. There's other kinds of information that can be gained from LiDAR and from just even walking the land. There's a whole new era coming of data aggregation analysis, and it's beginning to ingest this real world data from very real world projects, architectural data, land data, permaculture data. It's only going to be something that will be available for the future to come.
Okay, I pressed the button. Thanks, James. Yeah, wonderful to be part of this conversation. I'm a network weaver, as many of us on this call might identify as well. And I'm curious how you might activate this network. So yeah, what are you looking for? What would be your wish for 24? And I was thinking about maybe a broad answer to that, and then also the really specific, because there's obviously a lot of nuance in what you're doing. But so yeah, I'd love to hear those two kind of wishes. Yeah, what do you wish for?
Sure. Okay. So I won't be shy. I'll just say quite honestly that we are raising capital to invest in our Dutch holding company. So we have a pre-Series A round that we've kicked off, and there's some sort of bite-sized steps into that. But basically, we've raised a couple million euros since 2016, little bits and pieces from some family offices and some strategic partners along the way. I would say actively, this capital investment into the company starting Q2 24 or going into even Q2 24 to be able to bring the software forward and to bring not only that, the further development of these pilot communities that we're supporting these landowners on right now. Anyone on the call who's connected to a family office or high net worth individuals or strategic partners or anybody that might be interested.
A deal.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for organizing this particular call. So I am actually very lucky to be to have known James for quite some time. I was one of those first, lucky people who had attended his event at Copenhagen that he talked about. Uh, so I was very excited to see with the U4P and how U4P is engaging this particular concept forward. And so with James, I wanted to understand with this perspective is that uh, you talked about, and the questions were also being raised, how to be able to push forward this, not just project, but this mindset. And so I know we've had a discussion on that, but with this notion, I wanted to take the opportunity to talk about, see, there are 4 Ps that U4P has talked about, which was interesting: people, planet, progress, prosperity, and progress. I wanted to understand that with James, like you talked earlier about it, that in previously the lands used to be taken by on pennies by some other builders and constructors, and then they make other kind of ecological stuff which is not taking care of the land, the people, the community. But that is able to happen all over the world in every part of metropolitan suburbs areas is because the concept, the idea is placed among the people within the middle class, especially a lot, to be able to go to the hotels, to be able to go to these travel things. This has been happening for the last, say, 50, 70 years. So I know you're building up this gamification and this metaverse as well, but how do you really think we can do this 4 Ps of marketing with the idea concept? Like, how do we place the idea placement? How do we promote the idea within the middle class through mediums like social media, banners, traditional media? How do we create the publicity factor within newspapers, within other storytelling, within schools, within corporates, employees? How do we do that? And lastly, how do we set the pricing for able to get on board with this idea? If you could, because I was looking into these conversations and so I've made the note and I thought it would be nice to share with you, James, and see what you have to say about. Thanks a lot.
Sure. Well, I appreciate that very much. And also, to meeting you way back when in 2014 in Copenhagen, at really the birth of Regen Villages. And, we talk about the 4 Ps. We have something called the 4 Rs: regenerative, resilient, residential real estate. And actually that the method to my madness, if you will, is that we can use the VillageOS software to connect and facilitate to patient debt finance. In other words, a landowner, by noodling around with the software a little bit, can create a plan, get the preliminary approvals, and then gain access to funding. As we build these kinds of communities, they reduce burdens on government, on healthcare systems, on transit, on building new economic models, on creating basically brokering peaceful communities. Because when people have what they need and they feel like their neighborhood has their back, they're definitely not prone to going out into the world and being bad actors. So all of these are positive externalities that I feel like we can build a new kind of spreadsheet going forward that's much different than the quarterly kind of returns that we've been looking at.
Jazz.
My apologies for not having my video on. I'm in the middle of a snowstorm, a blizzard, actually. I wrote a question here, but it's definitely evolved as I've been deeply listening. First, I'd like to just say that I'm grateful to be here. So thank you so much for being so courageous to share all of this with us as a group. And then I'll also mention that my background is in what I call currently integrative regenerative design, deeply integrative. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'll base it on the work of Dan Shepard. I believe he's at UCLA, and he's working with various folks like Thomas Hubel and so forth. as it relates to bridging intra to intercommunication technologies and literature, et cetera. Hubel's work is about ancestral, epigenetic, ideas, and how the biggest issues are actually related to trauma. And that is inevitably what's holding us back. And I say that because I was reading about the soil sponge, which I do have a background in permaculture and regenerative design. And while that is true, and just like the limits and planetary boundaries literature, like it completely ignores humans. And so my questions are more about, well, we're all well-intended, I believe. How are we going to make this practical? Because what I'm seeing here in the field, and I'm in your bioregion in the Cascadia area in Oregon right now, which is where I happen to be living, there are a lot of issues, and I do not see them being, even if we started today, I don't know that. Is it possible? Absolutely, to build an eco-village, 100%, I'm on board. Let's do it right now. But again, there are some real hurdles that are above and beyond things like corporate shareholder primacy, which that's the nugget there, right? The issues with foundations and how they're created as entities. So there's these legal constraints. But furthermore, even Elon Musk, you brought him up, and since this is from the context of AI, and that's what you're, how you're positing we have some promise here to move forward. Even Elon Musk is afraid of what's going on with AI, because AI has to be constrained. And finally, I would just mention this, and I'm just curious about how any of this lands for you and what your reflections might be, James, but I don't know, when I understand, like, theoretically based on normal science and emerging science, what's actually going on with the ideas of sympathy, empathy, compassion, to understanding, and this evolution in ourselves as human beings from this place that we witness all of this life we're talking about here in this moment. I don't know that AI can ever actually function like a human being, like an ecology. So I'm just curious about, when you say how we can best make it compassionate, is that actually viable? And then furthermore, how are we actually we keep talking about on this like really high level, but permaculture is about doing land-based work with human beings as guardians. So I just want to keep this more in a discovery dialogue as opposed to a critique too. So thank you so much.
Starting with compassion, and with this whole idea of looking at being able to train AI in such a way that it's looking at especially land in a way that makes it easier for a landowner to understand what they have and what they can work with, especially in terms of the bioproductivity and bioavailability and water flows and soil types and things like this. Again, the sort of 10 to 12 inches of topsoil around the world is the reason why we exist. What's amazing to me is that, when you look at like something like Dubai, and they're able to just create these synthetic islands and put these multi-million-dollar mansions across these synthetic islands in the Arabian Sea. Or, it takes nobody even a heartbeat or a second to imagine a 100-story or 200-story building, in the middle of a city, and all of the complexity inherent that goes into that kind of design, that kind of building. And yet when it comes to imagining an eco-village, people are like, whoa, what are you talking about here? What are you saying? This sounds like Star Trek. This sounds like, or you get into sort of the ideas about socialism or communism or these communes. That's a big stigma that we have here in the US, right, about eco-villages. In Europe, there's much more of a rich cultural history around eco-villages and intentional communities, which in this country is not so much the case. So we really have to bring those things forward through action to show people like, oh, it's a neighborhood, but that's really very well connected to the natural world. Okay, simply put, I just want to say that we have an opportunity to have AI and machine learning before it steals our jobs and then tries to kill us, that we can actually teach it to build neighborhoods in the right way.
Okay, in the interest of time, does anyone have a quick question that they want to ask? And also, if anyone wants to add a question to the chat or email us, we'll be sure to forward those questions and get your responses as quickly as possible. Yeah, I don't see anyone. I mean, in the interest of time, I guess I'd like to close it and then ask Pavel for some of his closing remarks as well. I just wanted to thank everyone for being here and being part of our inaugural U4P talk series, and really to James for leading that off for us. As we mentioned, the 4Ps can mean a lot of things, but right now we have people, planet, prosperity, and progress, and the Regenerative Village project is certainly something that touches on all of those. And we hope to be forwarding the sort of tools, practices, methodologies that people are employing while also weaving together this bigger community to help make some of these projects happen. So I just wanted to thank everyone. Thank you, James, and I'll pass it over to Pavel.
Yes, thank you, Morgan. Thank you, James. Very comprehensive, very inspiring projects, and I agree with people that we really all look forward to see the fruits of this project, so that we can live in the vehicle villages designed by a software like this. I'm thinking that what I'm grateful for is that this was not only presentation of your project, but we really kind of mapped the field in a very beautiful way that will allow us to explore many of these questions that were raised in today's conversation, in the consequent conversation, and pull in more experts that can explicitly talk on what about water cycles, for example, or use of AI, including generative AI, and ethical concerns, and how we can overcome those by feeding it, let's say, different types of data, and really building up more regenerative relationship between digital models and human population. So there's plenty of important questions. We're just starting up, we're just warming up. Thank you for being there here with us, and I'm glad that we had like a first full start, but we finally are there, and this is happening. And I think it's a great opening of 2024. There is a movie that just came out which says 2024 is a year of regeneration. I think it's a beautiful message for all of us, that hopefully this is not just a hopeful statement, but really something that we will see in practice. And we wish you all the success with making this project real this year. Thank you very much for being with us. Let's hope that this is just the beginning of the beautiful friendship.
Yeah, I put my email, by the way, my email, my personal email, and my email at Stanford, and the website, the Regen Villages. I'm grateful for outreach and thoughtfulness beyond the call here today, and also just for the spirit and the wisdom here. There's so much heart-centered thinking and feeling going on, and so I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And just before you leave, our next talk is going to be on 13th of February, and there will be an amazing entrepreneur who is learning how to do the peace building work with the entrepreneurial focus. Mandar Apte, who is also coming from LA. So our next talk will happen in a month from now, but you'll see it in your mailboxes or in social media announcements. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a really great end of the day and the 2024. Bye.